struggled to fit in a lot. People thought I fit in better than I felt like I fit in. Definitely always struggled with being bullied and being a little bit socially awkward or uncomfortable at times. My father was quite the drinker, and then grew up in that environment a lot. My experience was I could do what I wanted, when I wanted, where I wanted, and I would not suffer the consequences. It shaped my perspective of growing up. I didn't fit in. I was drinking to forget. I wanted to feel like I was a part of something. I wanted to feel like I could be genuinely who I was. I wanted to feel like different than the anxious and afraid, self-deprecating thoughts that I had about myself, that I just didn't belong or that I was somehow unwanted. Beginning of my senior year, my father was going to have to go to rehab and had to have an intervention. I couldn't not show up high. A lot of hypocrisy in that. And that was a tough conversation too. He said no to everyone around the table and he kept looking at me, looked back at them, no. My mom had said she was going to divorce him if he didn't go to rehab, and he looked at me and he looked at her and he said, no, I'm not going. I looked at him and I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Just so you know that when I ask it, the only answer that you can give me is yes. The answer is yes, because if you don't, the next time you fucking see me is when I'm sitting on my mother's side of the courtroom watching her take half your fucking shit. Is this, you going to fucking treatment or not? He said yes. It hurts me to this day. I cut off a lot of days with my father that year. The days that I did spend with him, he was sober. And the times that I did talk to him, he was himself. Those were some of the best opportunities for us to look each other in the eyes and know how much we cared for one another. But he had checked himself back into the hospital to detox. He caught H1N1 while he was in there, and with the condition of his lungs and his liver, based upon his alcohol abuse, he just wasn't able to overcome that. I was 2 weeks away from graduating from college, but I got a phone call from my mom, and I wasn't told any details, but I was told I needed to get on the next flight out of Virginia Beach and to get back to Rhode Island as soon as possible. And I had a 2-hour layover in Newark, never had a longer layover. My uncle Michael picks me up at the airport, going 90 miles an hour to the hospital, pulls up to the emergency exit of a hospital. My aunt has one high heel in her hand and the other high heel is holding the emergency exit door. All I just hear is yelling, screaming to run. I walked into the room and I got 5 doctors pressing on my father's chest and blood is spurting out of his mouth, and I had all of 30 seconds to say goodbye.
That's a hell of a story. What a thing to go through.
It sucked, to say the least. Supposed to start working for him in 2 weeks at the family business. Fired, no job. No purpose, ultimately for me. I had actually been in a psychotic state. I had delusional, paranoid thoughts, sleep deprivation, stimulant abuse, hallucinogen from marijuana, alcohol consumption. I want the easiest and softest way through this process to not using ever again. My uncle put it really great when he was trying to convince me to go. You can either take the help I'm giving you, or you can go right the fuck back where you came from. All I knew was I didn't want to go where the fuck I just came from. If I was gonna do it, I was gonna do it right. And I was not gonna give up on myself because I knew I needed this more than I needed anything else in the world. They promised that if I did what I was supposed to do and I actually listened and I actually followed through, that I could be free again. That I could love myself, that I could live a normal life, that I could go back to school, that I could have an identity that was Richard, not Richard III. I wanted more than anything to have a life worth living.
Green lights and blue skies are on their way. Yeah, they're on their way.
Welcome to Crosstalk, the #1 podcast for recovery, for finding recovery and staying sober on the earth. We've done a survey of everyone on the earth, and we're the #1 podcast for recovery services. I want you to do a couple of things for me before we start this interview. I want you to like, follow, and subscribe, because if you do all those things, then the algorithm gets very happy and everybody's happy. Not just you, me, but an amazing guest that we have for you today. I want you to say hello to Richard C. Richard, thank you so much for being here today.
you, Corey. I appreciate it.
I'm really excited to get just right into it because we have a great story. I know a little bit of your story, not as much of your story as everybody's going to find out about today.
My mom and my father both grew up kind of in an Italian area in Providence, Rhode Island, and neither of them were college educated. And my dad worked with his parents in a family business, and they owned a small security guard company, they did some like shuttle transportation. So it really was a small family business environment. I'm Richard III, and so there was Dick and Richard III, and Dick had 13 grandchildren, 11 of them were boys, and my dad's the only son, and I'm the only son. So I kind of was
fair hair.
Yeah, the heir apparent. So it definitely kind of colored my perception of the world, but in a lot of different ways that may be different than what you think. So I have an older sister, and my mom was a teacher's assistant in public school systems, primarily working with like special needs students that needed extra help and attention in classes.
Just the two of you, your sister and
Just
yourself.
my sister and myself, yeah.
So what was school like for you?
I struggled to fit in a lot. I was slow to transition. I think that probably people thought I fit in better than I felt like I fit in. But I definitely always struggled with, being bullied and kind of like being a little bit, kind of awkward or socially awkward or uncomfortable at times, slow to kind of fit in socially.
Sports?
I played probably like all your traditional little leagues until like middle school time period. And then in high school, I took up rugby, and I did that for about 9 years through college and the like. So I wanted to be a part of a team or a club or an environment.
When did your alcohol and drug use start?
So my father was quite the drinker, and then I grew up in that environment a lot. So home environment was always kind of tense in a different way. He was funny and gregarious and loving, but it was like home at 11 o'clock at night, and if you didn't write down a note and ask something before 7:30 a.m., it wasn't happening, right? It's just the memory wasn't there. So
his memory wasn't there.
Yeah. More starting in the beginning of high school. And I didn't really get into drinking or drugs early. My mom was very reserved in a lot of good ways, right? And that kind of created our reservedness. My dad is very outgoing, and that has created my outgoingness. Really, once I got my own car is when I got my own freedom, and I got my own job.
16,
and that's when I wanted to explore, and that's when we explored. And so I remember my first time drinking was at my house with a couple friends, filling up a water bottle with a bunch of different liquors, drinking a little bit, not too crazy, and being like, this is something we want to do more of. Let's find a weekend where we can commit to this and not have any, experiment. And that first time that I did that, went to one of my friend Austin's house. We had a bottle of Jack Daniels, and 4 or 5 of us, I would imagine, were taking shots of Jack Daniels. Now, I wake up in the morning and I don't remember much of anything about what happened the night before, but I'm reminded by my friends that in the middle of the evening I wanted more Jack Daniels, and I was screaming at them in order to get more Jack Daniels, and they would pour me shots of root beer. I would take them, I would recognize that they weren't what I wanted, and I would begin screaming at them. Now, again, so the first time I drank, I couldn't get enough. And
would you characterize that as a blackout?
And I blacked out. I had no idea that happened. I didn't know any of those. So I blacked out and I couldn't get enough. It was the first time I ever drank, and that's generally speaking how I drank every time I drank. So whether it was going out with my friends, through high school or whatnot, I was drinking to forget, probably. Drinking as oblivion. It was the hope. I would be the first one to throw up, the first one to black out, the last one who should have been driving. My friends knew about it. If we were going out together, I shouldn't be behind the wheel, And that doesn't mean I didn't get behind the wheel. It just meant that, they made a concerted effort to, make sure that I was, not going to be in control of the vehicle.
So this is through high school.
Oh yeah, this is immediately.
Any events in high school that are of note, or when it comes to your substance use?
Not a ton. I mean, nothing that I can think of that was like really significant or serious at the high school level. I got in trouble with my parents for like different events that I lied about being at, and like, you know, because I could never keep my story straight, but I was always looking to find a way to go and drink and to, you know, use other substances, right? Mm-hmm. And it just, you know, I'd get caught all the time, you know, because I wasn't as sharp as I thought I was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the one interesting thing was that I'm from Rhode Island and it's a very small world, and my family... It's okay. Yeah, no, I'm from Rhode Island. It's a very small world, and my family was very connected in the political world of that. And like my own town, I was in this little town called East Greenwich. That's like the suburb we grew up in, and one of the captains of the police force, his father and my grandfather fought in the Korean War together. So when I got pulled over, when the cops thought I was trying to run away, and I had 6 kids in my car and a guy in the trunk, the reprimand was, you tell your father that you saw me at CVS, and I won't tell him what you did. And then you sit here, you tell him that I said hello. You know? And that was it. I got away with whatever. I got a traffic ticket. I got pulled over, went right to the judge. We went behind the courtroom, went into his chambers, discussed it, handled it, went home. I didn't even actually do it. My dad would do that, and I would just be told, stop screwing around.
And this is up till 16, 17, 18?
This is 18, 19, 20. When I went to college, my grandfather said, just remember this. When you get in trouble, not if. When you get in trouble, remember there's politics in heaven. And so my experience was I could do what I wanted, when I wanted, where I wanted, and I would not suffer the consequences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was quite a
That might be
lesson.
my quote, by the way.
Repeat the quote, because it's really, I want to hear this.
When you get in trouble, remember there's politics in heaven.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the quote.
I don't think so.
I don't know about that. If we want to remember one thing from this,
No.
that's probably not it.
No, fair enough. I understand.
But your grandfather's advice notwithstanding, you probably
It
learned.
shaped my world.
Yeah, there you go.
And it shaped my perspective of growing up. And I really wanted my 11 cousins, right, and my sister to accept me and you know, kind of treat me more evenly and fair, and to like me and care about me versus seeing me as, right, some extension of my father and grandfather. I think that my not fitting in dug as deep as that. I didn't fit in, you know. There was probably jealousy in that relationship, and some of the others as well, my cousins.
So would you say that not fitting in, and this is kind of cliche a little bit, but not fitting in was one of the reasons behind wanting to get outside yourself, change how you felt, to use?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to feel like I was a part of something. I wanted to feel like I could be genuinely who I was. I wanted to feel like, I don't know, different than the anxious and, you know, afraid and, you know, I guess self-deprecating thoughts that I had about myself, that I just didn't belong, or that like I was somehow, you know, unwanted.
And drinking was the primary thing that you
At
did.
that point, drinking was the primary thing. Marijuana use became a big thing, and then in college, stimulant abuse, primarily in the form of Adderall, was you know, another escape.
So it was Adderall, alcohol, marijuana through college. So what age are we now? We're in college. Is the use of alcohol and other things increasing, or is you kind of like you're on cruise control, doing well in school?
Yeah, so I did pretty well in school. I mean, I went my freshman year, and I wasn't really into Adderall at that point. It was mostly marijuana and drinking, and it wasn't too out of control. It was the nights, the weekends, the parties. You know, I didn't necessarily focus on school that much. I owned a small family business, and I was bound to, it didn't matter what my grades were. I was going to take over the business either way, and that was kind of my opinion of it. So if a course was a general education course and not something of great interest of mine, I flaked off. And I found Adderall, and then I went and got a script for that. And then it was a little bit easier to do some of my work. So there was some legitimacy, but I also loved the feeling, and it was a great feeling. And so I definitely just abused it because that's what I wanted to do. As I went through school, again, I think more marijuana use took over in my sophomore year. And I really became, trying and dabbling in other types of things, but nothing too crazy. Those were my primary substances. And, I was actually doing really well in school. My freshman year was the worst year, but I did the least amount of drugs, which is really because I wasn't serious about it. And then, stumbling a few times, and I didn't like having bad grades. I just didn't want to put in the work necessary, and I wasn't really necessarily mature enough to know the impact that might have. And so come my junior and senior year, my Adderall became more focused towards achieving better results in school, and I worked extremely hard to do much better and to move a trajectory towards being able to go to law school and so on. But yeah, the substance part of it probably was my end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year. My father was going to have to go to rehab and I had to have an intervention, and I couldn't not show up high. And I began to know that I had a problem that I couldn't stop.
So you showed up to an intervention for your dad high.
Yes.
And did you?
I mean, no one knew that, but I knew that.
Ah.
And I think that was the interesting thing. It was kind of I knew I was going to an intervention to get my dad help for his, drinking. And I knew he wasn't going to want to go. And his white blood cell count was in the single digits. His health was poor. It was going to be business accounts and colleagues and friends that we had known for years, as well as my family. And I was told I didn't have to write anything crazy or do much of anything. And I showed up high. And I remember the drive where I was trying to convince myself not to do drugs on the way. And I just couldn't emotionally prevent myself. I just couldn't.
And was that because you were so fearful of doing it, or you just wanted to be high?
I think it was a combination of it being my norm at that point and being afraid of what I was going into and not knowing if I was going to be able to process or manage the situation without the assistance of, that substance. And so I just did what I did, and I had to confront my dad, and the little hypocrisy in that. A lot of hypocrisy in that. I got him to go to rehab, I'll tell you. And that was a tough conversation too. But he said no to everyone around the table, and he kept looking at me, look back at them, no. Look at them, look at me, look back at them, no. And then it got to me, and my father and I had a great relationship, and I knew what to say to him, and I knew how to say it to him. So I told him,
you weren't even a lawyer yet, but
no, and again, it was a little shocking, I think, for his friends to hear me talk to my father this way, because they would have never expected it, and I didn't really care at that point. But my mom had said she was going to divorce him if he didn't go to rehab, and he looked at me and he looked at her and he said, "No, I'm not going," And I looked at him and I said, I said essentially, here's the deal. And this is actually one of the hardest things that I ever said in my life, and knowing I'm high, knowing it's hypocritical, but I was like, here's the deal. I'm going to ask you a question, and but I want you to know there's only one right answer to the question. So before I tell you what the question is, I want you to understand that there's not two answers and not two options. There's only one right answer, and I want you to know what that answer is, right? So just so that you know, that answer is yes, right? So I'm going to ask you this question. Just so you know that when I ask it, the only answer that you can give me is yes. Understood? And then I was just like, and I want to tell you why the only answer is yes. Because I don't want you to get confused over here. It sounds like you go around this room, you get a little confused, and I don't want you to get confused. The answer is yes, because if you don't, the next time you fucking see me is when I'm sitting on my mother's side of the courtroom watching her take half your fucking shit. Is this, you going to fucking treatment or not? And that's it. He said yes. And he packed his bags and off he went. And I know I'm high.
I would go to treatment.
Yeah. And it hurts me to this day, having said that. And He only lived for another year. He did go to treatment. He did 6 months. He came home and he tried to get a sponsor. He kept drinking on and off. He went to the program. I got to know his sponsor really well. They would come to my rugby games. They would spend time afterwards. Sometimes the sponsor wouldn't be there and he'd be drunk. Sometimes the sponsor would be there and he'd be fine. He'd call me drunk. I'd tell him I can't speak to him. I tried everything. And I struggled with, did I do the right thing? Because I cut off a lot of days with my father that year, and I wasn't able to spend them with him. But the days that I did spend with him, he was sober. And the times that I did talk to him, he was himself. And I still struggle with it, even though I know those were some of the best opportunities for us to look each other in the eyes and know how much we cared for one another. And yeah, it was tough. And
When he passed away, did he pass away from natural causes?
it was technically H1N1, but he had checked himself back into the hospital to detox and wanted to really get sober. And this was the first time he had kind of come to all of us and said that this was something he wanted to do on his own, and he knew he was struggling and he wanted to take it seriously, and he had been sick and he wasn't feeling well and he needed to go and take care of this. And he was there for a couple of weeks, and he was expecting to like discharge and do like an outpatient program. And he was doing this for himself, and he caught H1N1 while he was in there, and with the condition of his lungs and his liver, based upon his alcohol abuse, he just wasn't able to overcome that. He ended up on an intubator, and he was in a forced coma for 2 weeks. And so, very traumatic experience. I was 2 weeks away from graduating from college. I was at the national championship weekend in Virginia Beach my senior year. It was a 2-day tournament. You play in the semifinals and then the finals the next day. After the semifinal game ended, we lost. And that was his own emotional experience, because I don't think we should have, but that's another story. But I got a phone call from my mom, and I wasn't told any details, but I was told I needed to get on the next flight out of Virginia Beach and to get back to Rhode Island as soon as possible. And that's what I did. And I had a 2-hour layover in Newark, and I can tell you that you never had a longer layover. And don't know why, but you know why. And things are not well, you need to get home, do it now. My uncle Michael picks me up at the airport, going 90 miles an hour to the hospital. He pulls up to the emergency exit, not the emergency room, the emergency exit of a hospital. My aunt has one high heel in her hand, and the other high heel is holding the emergency exit door, and all I just hear is yelling, screaming to run. Just run. She's chasing me with a high heel in her hand, barefoot, up a flight of emergency exit stairs in a hospital, and I walked into the room, and I got 5 doctors pressing on my father's chest, and blood is spurting out of his mouth, and I had all of 30 seconds to say goodbye. So.
That's a hell of a story. What a thing to go through.
It sucked, to say the least.
And you're 21.
Yeah. Supposed to start working for him in 2 weeks at the family business. Fired, no job. No purpose ultimately for me, and so the drinking, the marijuana use, the Adderall use, I'm essentially sent back to school.
Did that kind of
it was fine. I don't know if I could have done anything better at the time, but I really wanted to go and start my own, be my own man. You know what I mean? And like, I was really looking forward to working with my dad. We had rectified some of what happened the year before, and I was going to work for him, you know?
Did those events light a fuse in terms of substance use, or was it not like that?
Yeah, no, it really was. I mean, I was probably getting more into marijuana use over alcoholism during the year that he was in rehab. And a lot of it was a choice where I thought to myself, I tend to have, a more of a aggressive drunk than I wanted, than I even wanted. And I tend to black out more, and I tend to have a higher chance of getting in trouble or being dangerous to just in the car driving, just being not knowing what I do. And marijuana kept me on the couch, and I watched what my dad was going through with alcohol, and I felt like if I just smoke pot and I'll be fine, I can have fun, I can be with my buddies, I won't cause any problems, it's not a big deal. And so marijuana started to become like the preferred drug out of a goal of not being an issue. I didn't really want to get in trouble. I wanted to preserve I didn't want to be arrested. I didn't want to get the trouble that I knew I could. And so my drinking picked up after he passed. I, belonged to a country club. All of his buddies are there. They want me to come hang out. I'm taking over the family business in their mind, but I'm not actually even going to be employed by them in reality, right? They want to. I'm sent to network with the people that we have relationships with, but I have no authority. I have no nothing, right? Like I don't even work there. But my grandmother, needed the space to be able to run the business properly. Wanted me to go back to school, but encouraged me to maintain relationships that I had at this point. My grandfather had died 3 months before my dad. And so...
A lot of loss there.
Yeah, it was just tough. And so I drank. And I finished a year at my undergrad going towards an MBA so I could continue to play rugby. I had my teammates. About 8 of us stayed back, and that's when we pushed and we won the national championship. I was the president of the club. That was part of my primary focus. I wanted maybe a little revenge for that loss that was so painful because it was like all packed into a day. I wanted something. I wanted a different outcome.
And you're 22 at this point.
Yeah, and I was going to law school the following year.
And did you go directly from college? You got an MBA first?
I didn't finish the MBA program. I kind of just did the MBA classes and decided that I'd prefer law school and decided that during that MBA year, I would take the LSATs and kind of apply, and that's the direction I wanted to go.
So my story is similar to yours in terms of alcohol and drug use, where I was doing all that stuff in college, going into law school. I don't know how I got through law school, frankly, but I had this buddy of mine, Bobby, who I'm going to see in a week or two for lunch, and he would pull me by the collar about 10 days before the exams and say, sit down, and without my friend Bobby, I don't think I'd become a lawyer, because I was just wanting to party.
Yeah.
And that's how I got through law school. What was it like, getting into law school and being in, the norm, the standard was, not whether or not I'm going to do something, it's when am I going to do something and what am I going to do?
Yeah, law school is the real downfall of my substance abuse. I was going out to a new environment and I struggle fitting in, and I really struggle assimilating to new schools. So
where'd you go?
I originally went to Salve Regina for undergrad, and I went to Roger Williams University for law school, which is both in Rhode Island,
okay,
right?
That's right.
And so again, I had this little insulated bubble. I couldn't even get in trouble. I didn't have an interest in leaving.
And you said the transitions were really difficult for you.
Yeah, whether I went to a new school for high school or middle school, or when I moved from Cranston to East Greenwich, like in the 4th grade, it was never easy for me to make new friends at the new school quickly.
So now you're going to law school. The family business is done now?
No, my grandmother still runs it to this day. She's 87. So family business is going.
Shout out to Grandma.
Grandma's amazing, actually. And so she's the one who just basically said, this is the new path for you. And at the time, my experience with it is different than the results, right? And it was kind of like, that was my purpose in life. I was brought up to run this business. Like, that's what I was told I would do. Like, I identified as my father's son, as my grandfather's grandson. I identified as someone who was going to take over this business, and I kind of engaged school that way. Although I had dabbled in the idea of law school even beforehand, it wasn't necessarily for the purpose of becoming a lawyer so much as it was an achievement or something that I might be skilled at. And schooling wasn't my father's greatest, push for me. When I got C's, my dad was like, C's? I never got no C's.
But being a lawyer would help if you decided to go into the family business.
Exactly. It was a great resource. And so part of it was, even when I went to law school, initially, my grandmother thought of it that way as well. So she was very supportive of me in financially, helping me continue, because circumstances were now different, right? Circumstances were significantly different for my family, with my dad making an income, even though the business existed. the relationships don't last forever when the person who's maintaining them isn't around.
Right.
And so it just changed. And so I went to law school. I actually, the first couple of days of law school was like, I played golf with a couple of buddies that were my dad's buddies, my accountant, and the guy who owns a local business. My dad, my dad's age.
Hold on just 1 second. Is it okay? Yep. All right.
Yeah. We played golf, probably had like 5 or 6 gin and tonics, had a couple of beers, had some appetizers. But then there's a group of guys and girls for law school meeting the day before orientation at a restaurant in Bristol. So I got to drive 45 minutes. I played golf. I had 5 or 6 gin and tonics, a couple of beers. No big deal, 45 minutes, nothing. Jump in the car, drive over there, order 2 bottles of wine. Nobody wants them. I'm like, what do you mean I bought the bottles of wine? Nobody. They're like, oh no, we got orientation tomorrow. I'm like, okay. So I drank them by myself at this table, Showed up the next day. Oh my God, right? First thing we're done with orientation, I was like, who wants to go to dinner? Like, get a couple more bottles of wine, right? And nobody was like that. Surprisingly, I was very confused. But my law school routine and my first semester were the most difficult and I guess they were the bottom. They were the pathway to this bottom. So my routine was essentially at 3:30 in the morning, I would take a 30 milligram Adderall XR and I'd chew it. And then I would set my alarm for 5:30. And I would only break up some of the little beads for the time released. 5:30 would hit, I'd wake up, get in the shower, get in the car, drive to the beach, smoke some marijuana, continue to snort more Adderall, go to class, get out, go to the bar, 3 or 4 IPAs, snort some more Adderall, smoke some more weed, go back to class, be done. Liquor store, bottle of wine, 6-pack of beer, cigar store, 8 o'clock, that's all gone. A few more gin and tonics, and I would probably do about 180 to 200 milligrams of Adderall snorted daily. And I would so from like 8 to 3 in the morning, and that's when I would do my work.
Now, hang on a second. There's not going to be a test on this because there's no way I could repeat all of that. That's a lot of using it's not even 24 hours.
Yeah, and that was every day, at least Monday through Friday. And from September of my first 1L year through Christmas, even after the exams. I did great. I had a 3.5. I graduated with the 3.45 total, GPA. But so what happened was Christmas Eve at the country club, we have eggnog day. I don't know if you have eggnog day, but we have eggnog day.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. But eggnog day, and I went there and I was hanging out with some of my dad's buddies at the club, and I bumped into a table of glasses that were holding the eggnog on the way out the door. Because I was trying to go home for Christmas Eve services, and they shattered and broke on the ground. And as I'm walking out the door, someone said, "Picking up right where his father left off." Ooh. And I don't know who said it. And I got in the car, and I broke down crying. And I had 1 Adderall left for my prescription, and I took it. But I knew that the next morning when I woke up, I didn't want to do that again. So I wanted to quit. I don't know what happened after Christmas. I don't remember that Christmas at all. I don't know how many days I slept, but I woke up one day down the week afterwards when I didn't have school and I was on break, and I got out in the car, and I wouldn't want to do any more Adderall. I had actually been in, during that entire period, a psychotic state. I had delusional and paranoid thoughts.
A week?
No. From September to December, the entire 3 to 4 month period. And I was greatly suffering from my internal, sleep deprivation, stimulant abuse, hallucinogen from marijuana, alcohol consumption. I was paranoid. I thought people were recording me everywhere I went. I had all kinds of delusional and paranoid thoughts, and I was struggling greatly, and I figured it was the Adderall, so I stopped that. But I didn't stop the marijuana or the drinking. I ended up in a psychiatric a hospital in January.
What year?
This is Christmas of 2012, January of 2013. And I was there for about 8 days. They all thought it was significant mental health. They didn't think it had anything to do with substances, primarily because when they asked me if I was doing any drugs, I said, no. I said, why would I do those things? Those are terrible for you, you know. And then you're like, no, I swear to God, I do drugs. And they were like, we don't believe you. You know what I mean? Like a week ago, you said you didn't. And you're like, I swear, that's no problem. Let me out of here. They're like, no, you get to stay. So what happened was, there's a bunch of stuff that goes on there. But what happened is actually it was 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. I wake up in the middle of the night and I walk out into the main area of the ward, this pavilion, whatever they call these things. And I turn the corner, I look at the nurse's station, and there's this young woman standing there. I look her dead in the eyes. I know her. We went to college together. We know each other. We know each other's friends. Like we weren't necessarily close friends, but like she knew exactly why I was there. And I just turned around and walked right back to my fucking room. And the next morning, when I met with the psychiatrist, they believed that I did drugs, and they were ready to release me. And when I saw her at the bar a couple weeks later, and I was not drinking at that point, or a couple months later, she walked right up to me and she asked me how I was doing. And I knew for certain the only reason I'm not in a psychiatric hospital today is that young lady. And I think about her and thank her quite often. But interestingly, I met someone else in that psych ward, asked me to meet them for a drink. Went down to this bar, I ordered a scotch. And I'm sitting there, and he shows up, orders a water. I was like, a water? You maybe asked me to meet me for a drink. He goes, yeah, I think that you should go to an AA meeting. You shouldn't drink anymore. And I was like, I met this guy in a psych ward. He was a patient.
He was a patient. That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, he was a patient. And I said, you couldn't make this stuff up. I'm like, you're going to be kidding me. He goes, there's a meeting tomorrow morning at this church in Warwick at 7:30, and I think you should be there. And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me.
Did you go to the meeting?
I did. I showed up high. I didn't have a drink. And to this day, I have only had non-alcoholic like beer since. I've never had another alcoholic drink of like, any kind of liquor or beer or wine or anything. I've had non-alcoholic beers, and there's a whole part of that, but like I misbelieved that it was okay, but I knew from that moment that like I had to solve that problem at least. And now I'm down Adderall and I'm down alcohol, but I'm still smoking marijuana, and the psychotic thoughts are still there.
2 down, 1 to go.
Yep. And the Adderall comes back later. I definitely don't stay successful in that. And I don't stay successful in cocaine or Molly or whatever else either. But like I did with the alcohol, but I could not beat down the beast, on my own. About a month later, I ended up back in a psychiatric facility. My uncle, my godfather, he's a firefighter, and worked on the ambulance truck, so he had his crew meet us at the gym, and he stole my keys from me, and they basically said, get in the fucking back of this ambulance, you know what I mean? And they hit me with a sedative, and I showed up in the psych ward, It was just like, you're coming with me. And I think that man as well.
Is that called the Marchman Act?
That's not called the Marchman Act. That's called the Uncle John. That's called the Uncle John. Nobody. I remember he had my keys, and I grabbed him by the shirt. And he, by the way, for the year and a half that I was struggling, or for the months that I was struggling up to this, and for the year and a half afterwards, he met me every single day at 7 a.m. at the gym to take care of me. After my dad died, he was there for me every day. He was amazing. So I grabbed him by the shirt, he's holding my keys, and he goes, I'm the only person in the world that you don't want to hit in the fucking face. I can tell you that. I just dropped my fists, and he was like, get in the fucking back of this goddamn ambulance. And you're like, God. And so honestly, I couldn't have been hit literally over the head harder by God telling me what direction to go, and I just couldn't see it for the life of me. And everything else wasn't getting ruined. It was just I was ruining myself,
How old are you at this point?
22, 23, I guess.
These are long years.
These are very long years. Yeah, so 23 at that point, probably. I go to the psych ward for 24 hours. I basically am on my way to...
This is like a layover in Newark.
Yes.
My God.
Yes.
You had a lot packed into this time.
Yes, so my... I'm in the psychiatric facility and they want to ship me off to a long-term state hospital. That's the end of it, right? They want to diagnose me with things that I threatened to throw them through the window for even mentioning. And this woman, Sabina, who actually, so with the Caron Gala coming up, Sabina will be there, my Uncle John will be there. I've never met Sabina in my life. Sabina doesn't know me. You know, I don't want to use her last name. Maybe we don't want to include this part of it, but...
Johnson.
Yeah. No, she had never met me, and she told that doctor that I was her patient and that I had a substance use problem and that I needed to be transferred to a substance use disorder treatment facility. And that's the only reason they let me go. And so she changed my life. So these people are angels in my fucking life. So I've invited Sabina from Antigua to come join us at the gala with my family. And I've never met her. I've talked to her once on the phone 8 years afterwards. And I'm, you know, I'm very excited to, she saved my life.
Our listeners don't know this, but Richard is being honored for a variety of different things, including being a great guy and service to the community. We'll get into that a little bit later. But when he talks about a gala, he's talking about an honor that he and his family are going to be getting. So it's a little bit of a non sequitur at this point, but congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah. And so that is kind of, you know, the meaningfulness of it is that the honor is related to the recovery community itself. And so having the people that without I would not be here attend is more meaningful than not, right? Very, very important.
So you go to a substance use disorder treatment facility as opposed to a psych ward.
Yes.
And what happens?
This is a place called Arms Acres in Caramel, New York.
I know it.
Carmel, sorry. I've been saying it wrong for...
Yeah, caramel is a very different thing that's delicious.
Yeah,
caramel is kind of, yeah, it's nice. Nothing wrong with caramel.
Unless you're in Arms Acres.
That's right.
And that's a locked facility, mostly a drug court based. And I had a wonderful experience where I met all of my fears, and they all were other patients. No, there was a lot of just, it was life as I did not want. And I didn't necessarily have the cognitive functioning that I needed to take in a lot of what they were trying to provide. I can't really speak to the quality of the program because I was not the quality of patient that would remember. But what I can say is that there were some couple of people that were wonderful people that had some very troubled pasts, and they were looking for real help. And then there were some other people that were there because they were in drug court, you know? And so one guy was an attempted axe murderer, another guy had done 25 years for murder, most of them were burglars, or, you know, someone had done a stick up on the subway, and, you know, that's what it was, you know?
I've actually been at the facility. I know what it's like. I've had some people who were patients there that I knew.
Yeah, and, you know, I don't think it was a bad experience for me. I think it was what I needed when I needed it. It scared me straight in its own way, because that's the path that I was that was the life that I was heading towards. There was no, you know, you think of it as like a Medicaid based or like, you know, in-network insurance and drug court-esque program exclusively, right? Not really trying to think outside the box, trying to provide services to those who need. And they were the only ones that were willing to accept me with what I had, you know, as a locked program, right? That could service someone who should otherwise be in a psych ward according to their medical records. It was my only option. And so on Easter, they let me go, and I got in a train, took it to Penn Station, whatever, or Central, and transferred and went on the train back to Rhode Island, and I had an AA meeting that day. I did not stay sober, but I knew that I did not want to have the continued experiences. And I tried my best. In about 4 months or so, I relapsed on marijuana. Instantaneous psychosis. Smoke pot once, right back to delusional and psychotic thinking. Take time off, try it again. take time off, try it again. I did about 9 months max sober, and so I would try to do that around law school. I was getting back into law school. I was going back to classes. I did my summer program, got some courses to catch up. Did the next full year, waited not through the first, not through the fall semester, but at the spring semester's finals, went back to, trying a few things, smoking some marijuana, put the summer internship together, and come back that next fall. It's the fall of 2014. And at that point, I'm about 25 years old. And so I had strung together maybe a year and a half, almost
You're still in law school at this point.
In law school,
and
yeah.
You're in the third year?
No, because I lost a semester. It should have been starting what would have been my third year, but I was actually in my second semester of my second year.
Okay.
And I didn't finish that semester either. So I was a year and a half. I had finished a year and a half of law school at this point.
So you have another year and a half left, and you're in and out, up and down, not really staying sober.
Yeah, continue. So at this point, I go back to Adderall and marijuana, and I had done the cocaine and the non-alcoholic beers and the, Molly, and honestly, I'd go to AA meetings and I found the one guy who smoked crack in the room and was like, I did Molly, and he was like, did you have a drink? And I was like, I didn't have a drink. They're like, you didn't, then you're in AA. You're not in, you're not in NA. I was like, this guy's great.
So you're in law school right now, and tell us a little bit about what happens. Did you finish law school this way, or did you?
No, I did not make it to law school this way. I dropped out for a medical withdrawal in that fall of 2014, and I just did drugs, really. Drove around in my car, put about 36,000 miles on my car in, 6 months' time. And I just drove I smoked pot and I snorted Adderall.
So did you finish the second year?
No.
Okay, so a year and a half, you take a medical leave, and you're
and I'm just in, la la land, absolute and I wake up one morning. I had some significant events that just things that kind of hit me. And I wake up one morning and it's a Thursday, December 4th. And I look at, I don't know what time of day it is, but I look at my side table and there's a bowl with marijuana and some, and I think to myself, if I smoke this, I don't know when I'll be back. But I was like, I need this to stop. And I decided that I was not going to do any drugs, and I was going to get in the car, and I was going to drive to my grandmother's office, to the family business, and drive to the office and see my grandmother, and I was going to ask for help. Because if I even just touch this right now, I have no idea when the next time I have this opportunity, whatever clarity of mine came, and I drove, and I went and saw her. She sat me down in the conference room, and I don't know how long. I felt like I sat there all day, could have been 20 minutes, but I just felt like I was just sitting there, and it just was like, what we're going to do, and she made a plan. You're going to come to my house, we'll get some dinner, you'll stay in with me, we'll wake up in the morning, I'll clean up some stuff at the office, and we'll drive to your aunt and uncle who are in recovery in New Jersey. And that's what I did. And Thursday I showed up, and I have a cousin Patrick who's sober, a year and a half at that point, and he's, got a decade now. I think he's coming up on 11 years this year. And then I have an aunt and uncle. At that time, they have 23. Now they have 33. They're coming up on 33 this year, And so their house, and so so we're the two nephews, right? So it's kind of, and so he takes me to some meetings. They set me up with some friends for some meetings. They take me to some meetings, and they want me to go to a program called Caron. And
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Okay, so you go to Caron, PA.
Yeah.
And you get there, and how did that go?
It's December 8th, and I don't want to be there, but I don't want to use. And I want the easiest and softest way through this process to not using ever again. My uncle put it really great when he was trying to convince me to go. And he said, I'm fucking done trying to convince you to go. He said, you can either take the help I'm giving you, or you can go right the fuck back where you came from. And all I knew was I didn't want to go where the fuck I just came from. That's it. That was all that drove me. I just didn't want to go back where I came from. And I begrudgingly and argumentatively took every suggestion. And I say that because they wanted me to go to a place down here, Caron, Florida, Renaissance, and I argued with them about it, and I negotiated terms, and I made sure that I got the room that I wanted to have, and they had to clean it up a certain way, and and if I got it, then I got it, and I leveraged the cost in the negotiations, and when I knew that once I chose to do that, when I decided to get on the flight and to take an 84-day treatment program at Caron Renaissance, that I was doing all of it. I knew that. The 30 days of PA were great for me to get me in the mindset and to get me to make that decision. And I needed all those 30 days. And then they were trying to convince me to do the long-term care program, and I was very apprehensive of it. And I thought it was expensive, and I thought I didn't need it, and I thought it was too much, and blah, blah, blah. But I knew that once I said yes, when I got there, if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. And I was not going to give up on myself because I knew I needed this more than I needed anything else in the world. And that's what I did. I landed here, and I got their little philosophy book, and I highlighted it, and I took notes in the margins, and I sat in the back porch the day I got there doing it. I didn't want to know anybody. I wanted to make sure I knew what I needed to do to have what they were promising. What they promised was freedom. And they promised that if I did what I was supposed to do and I actually listened and I actually followed through, that I could be free again. That I could love myself, that I could live a normal life, that I could go back to school, that I didn't have to go to school, that I could find a job, that I could have an identity that was Richard, not Richard III. And that I could be what I wanted to be. And that I, just could take off of all of the things I was afraid of, and I was sold. That was all I needed. I wanted more than anything to have a life worth living.
So you had enough.
I had enough.
Right. So you go to 30 days, and then you go to the 84. And what do you do after that? You start going to meetings, start connecting with people? What happens?
I met this young man. I searched for a sponsor, honestly, because that was my biggest issue. I never really got into the program. I had been to the AA rooms all these times, but I never found anybody that I trusted or I connected with. I tried priests. They never got into the steps. So I kept searching. So I knew that I needed to do that. I was searching for a sponsor, and it was 5:45 a.m. There was a 5K at Caron, and I met this young man, Ben Williams. Couldn't look different than me. Korean, 5'8". Whatever. If I think I might be generous, but that's fine. And dressed up like he's going to run a 5K, but he's clean cut, hair's combed and gelled, Rolex on the wrist, just his clothes fit well. He's in shape. He's bright-eyed. I knew he's not a patient. I knew he was like someone there to help. I walk over to him. I introduce myself, and I ask him what he's doing there. I had never seen him before. We start chatting. His father had died 30 days before from alcoholism, and he wanted to get back into the program after having 5 years sober so he could help somebody else and find someone to help. And I couldn't have been more related in that moment that the loss of my dad, and that was his struggle, that he felt like this service work could help him from the emotional standpoint, get re-engaged. And then we started talking more, and then I asked him where he said he was so proud that his dad got to see him graduate before he passed away. He had gone back to school, and he'd finished his degree at Roger Williams University, which is where I went to law school. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy couldn't look more different than me, and it couldn't be more like to my situation.
Actually, I know him, and I see the resemblance, actually.
Yeah. So at that moment, I kind of knew this was who I needed.
That's great.
Yeah.
What a great guy.
And he was amazing. And so I did what he said. And I went to meetings, and I built a fellowship, and I worked the steps, right? And I've been sober since. And so I dove right into really the service work, trying to sponsor guys, trying to work the program, trying to get to meetings. I had a car earlier than some, primarily because I needed to go to law school at night in Fort Lauderdale area. So I could drive people around to meetings and so my service, from all different levels. It was just available. And I needed to go, and so I needed to work full time. So I worked full time, went to law school at night, and then at one point I went to law school full time and worked overnight. And I just knew that AA and fellowship were always going to be the core of what I wanted to do. And I wasn't sold on being a lawyer. Even though I knew I needed to finish the degree, I didn't love the idea of going and finding a job at a law firm, and maybe you just get a job that you like the practice area. But you need the job, so you don't know what practice area you're going to get the job at, right? And that will become your specialty. And I was dead set on picking the client. I knew the client I wanted to help. And so I needed to find a way to help people in recovery and to help families in particular. They were going through struggles with someone who was in as difficult a position as my father and as difficult a position as me, right? Who was resistant, but yet talented enough to make it through the normalcies of life, but struggling in all of their aspects, that just had this barrier and the family needed help. And I wanted to help that. I wanted to help people in recovery. I wanted to help all of those things. And so I needed to find a way to learn what the client needed and then figure out what legal problem I could solve for them later. So I went to work in the treatment industry, and it was all geared towards just being of service in that world. I just didn't want to work in the regular law firm environment because that just wasn't where I was. And so I worked at Caron, and I tried to get in their government affairs division so that I could work on policy reform and make things better and higher quality of care and assist with patients, do compliance and operations and improve the business, where I had some background from my family's work. And so I was able to kind of contribute in different ways there, but it wasn't traditional law. With time, I had gained a significant amount of knowledge over what families in those circumstances were really struggling with and what clients were struggling with, and how the law and some of the applicable areas of law that existed in our, in the treatment world were. And one of those is the Marchman Act, right? So I decided that I was going to leave, Caron and start my own practice. And one of the areas I was going to do was trust and estate planning, because you can do, incentivized trust work, right? You can even if it's not necessarily incentivized, you can just incorporate at least substance abuse provisions that can shut off the spigot, things that families were needing. So I was kind of looking at, that's an easier practice area to enter into, right? Not super easy, but if you're niche down and specific and focused, you can study it and learn it and provide those services. So I was like, this is how I'll help. And the Marchman Act was a natural secondary.
For people that don't know what the Marchman Act is, could you describe in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, so what we do is we help families who have a loved one who's suffering from a substance use disorder get that loved one into treatment, even when they're unwilling to and the family doesn't think it's possible. And it ultimately is a involuntary substance use treatment court order. But you can access the same quality private healthcare facilities in the state of Florida. So it's not hospitals, it's not state-run programs exclusively. It can be anything that works with your insurance so that you're able to afford, right? If it's licensed in the state of Florida to provide substance use treatment, the Marchman Act can help you get your loved one into those programs.
So in most of the other states, you need some leverage to get somebody in treatment. Here you need a judge's signature, and it's just Florida we're talking about, but it's particularly effective when somebody's in the state.
And we bring people from all over the country and the world into Florida to leverage this opportunity for families, right? So because what we're doing is, we think in the long term, extremely beneficial. There's statistical studies that show that there's no statistical difference in outcome based upon whether treatment is court-ordered or not court-ordered, but there is studies that show statistical significance of better outcomes for the length of care. So the longer they're there. So if you have someone who's only willing to stay for a day, or someone who's court-ordered to be there for 90, it doesn't matter if they're court-ordered or not, voluntarily or involuntarily. What matters is they did 90. They have a better chance of getting sober and living a better life in that circumstance.
So what's interesting is we've had people on Crosstalk that are clinicians, superior people who are working in the therapy community down here and up north. And what's kind of similar runs through all of our veins. We all have a different personality. Our fingerprints, our faces are all different. But we all want to give back. And we all give back in different ways. And we've never had anybody on Crosstalk that's given back in the way you are, but you're helping an awful lot of people. I'm interested in knowing, are you still very involved in going to recovery meetings? How do you sustain your own sobriety?
Yeah, so I have a network, I have fellowship, and I maintain that. I wouldn't say that I'm going to meetings on a daily or a weekly basis, but I maintain a spiritual relationship with God on a daily basis. I maintain contact with my sponsor on a daily basis. I maintain contact with my fellows and my fellowship that are in recovery on a daily basis. I do attend AA meetings, and I do believe that having a sponsor and working the steps are the most important thing as it relates to maintaining sobriety. But I do think that everybody has their own kind of manner of retaining that spiritual connection and obtaining that kind of like serenity that comes with it. But more importantly, just maintaining recovery. And so I've been sober now somewhere over 9 years. And, meetings have always been important. But I think because I was working at nights and going to school during the days and going to school, work at days and school at nights, there weren't as many meetings were harder. So I found other ways that sustained that spiritual connection and faith in God. And to me, that's the most important thing, the relationship and faith and trust in God. That I can stay sober if I only let him help me.
Right.
That it does include talking to my sponsor regularly, who's still Ben Williams and so forth. But
he hasn't changed his name.
No, he's kept it.
Don't say his last name.
Ben W.
Yeah.
You can just call it Ben W for every Ben W.
Yeah.
You mean Ben Williams?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that his,
Only because I don't know if he's.
did you say
Sure.
Transition.
I said his last name a ton.
Yeah.
But-
Right, he's gonna be on. Okay, he's gonna be on actually on Monday,
Oh, okay.
and so
We'll find out if he likes the Williams or not.
yeah, only because
Yeah.
we're gonna transition. I just want to make sure he's.
Yeah, that's okay. My last name's Casey, in case anyone's wondering.
So one question I want to ask. First of all, it's fascinating how you've gone from the arc of your life from being the one you want to go back to where you came from, and now you're doing for other people what your relatives were doing for you. Everybody was trying to do for you, and I'm sure they're very proud of you. And at the honoring ceremony, I'm going to try to change things around so I can be there to be there personally.
I'd love for you to come,
I'm going to try to do that.
but you got to take care of your health as well.
So I have a question for you. So if we were sitting here right now with 10 or 12-year-old Richard, what would you're like 23 now? How old are you?
34.
Okay. What would 34-year-old Richard tell 12-year-old Richard that you know now that you didn't know then?
God. The first thing that came to mind is to cherish every moment with your father. Because that would be ideal. That's still an impactful loss in my life, as you could imagine. As it relates to my own life, I don't have any regrets. I don't know if I'd change anything. I don't know if I would be as good at helping people if I hadn't gone through the struggles that I had. Some of the families that we help the most are people that have marijuana-induced psychosis and their loved ones. And these parents do not know what to do, and they don't know where to go for help, and their loved ones are unnegotiable. They will not engage in a rational conversation about their need for self-care. And that was me. My family didn't find the Marchman Act, and I was really fortunate to end up with having the supportive family that I did, and the amount of pressure that they could place directed me but it took years. And it was only because of the grace of God that I did find even the opportunity to go and talk and ask for help. But I know that I was psychiatrically stabilized twice, and that my chances of going to a long-term state hospital were extremely high. And I know that these families struggle with the same thing. So 34-year-old me to 12-year-old me probably tell me to do the exact same thing. Just spend more time with your family, love them more, appreciate their time more. Don't rush out of the house as quickly as you would. Just to cherish the moments you never know that you will never have again. The rest of it, I'm glad it happened. I wouldn't be me if I didn't have it.
It's a great way to wrap our session up. Really fascinating to hear the arc that you've traveled. And I know how many people you help, and you have a great partner. And there are not that many people on this earth doing the things that you do. And you do them really well. And I'm grateful that you were here as our guest.
Thank you for having me.
For my part, this is really inspiring. And the reason I do this is because every time I speak to somebody who's gone through what we all go through when we start out doing the wrong thing and end up figuring out how to go the right way, I learn something each time. Today was no exception. And thanks so much for being here, Richard.
Before we wrap it up, there's a second question. What's a question that you wish people would ask you more often?
So Sergio wants to know, is there a question that people, that you would like people to ask you that you don't get asked?
What do you wish people would ask you more often?
A question that you wish people would ask you more often.
The question that you think that Corey thinks that I should be asked more often?
What are you trying to say?
What question do you wish people would ask more often?
What question do you wish people would ask me more often?
Yeah, no, you, not
I know what. What question do I think that people should ask me more often?
The question that I would like them to ask me more often is, would you mind if I took the check? Yeah, that's not the answer. But this questions come up, and the answers that we get are all over the place. But is there a question you'd like people to ask you in life, or in your professional life, or in your personal life, that you'd like to be asked more often? This is Sergio's idea of a brilliant question, so we're asking it.
it was going to be that complicated. I would have not asked.
I would say the interesting thing about that is I don't think it's the question that I wish people would ask me more often. I think it's the question that people ask that I wish they actually cared what the answer was. And I wish that people would ask, how are you doing? And actually give a shit.
You know, it's incredible, but that is exactly what everybody seems to gravitate towards. How are you doing? And really care.
And actually genuinely care. And so it's not the question it's the question they always ask out of politeness. But I don't need your politeness. I need your compassion, or I need your empathy. I need you to build a genuine relationship with me. And if you don't want to know how I'm doing, that's fine.
Don't ask.
Don't ask.
Right.
Yeah. So I'd prefer that when people engage with me, they do it from a standpoint of just being genuine. And if that means they ask, that means they ask and they mean it. And if they don't, I will not be offended.
Got it.
Question, follow-up. When they ask and they actually mean it, are you genuine with your answer if you're not doing well?
Depends on who's asking.
Okay.
Yes, but if you're talking about my friends, and like, I don't even necessarily mean my most close inner circle, but if you're talking about like my friends, people that care, and they say to me like, how are you doing? And they do it in a way that's not as an introduction or a greeting or in a public setting, but they mean to ask me, then I'm I'm probably one of the more candid people you'll meet. Yeah, so I definitely would tell people, and I hope that they want to do something with that. And when I ask that, I do want them to tell me. I do want them to feel not judged. I do want them to at least let me in enough to know that either they just want me to listen or to help me find a place that I can help them, right? Enough that, like, if there's something I could do, you know, I can't change their world for them, and listening might be all they can do. But if it's another phone number I could give them, a contact that I could make, you know, an opportunity to meet again and check in on them, those types of things. Yeah, I do mean that when I ask. And when I don't ask.
You guys got all your questions answered?
Yeah. Beatrice, any questions?
Beatrice is good?
No questions.
This is a wrap. We got
Great.
the editor that's going to make this perfect.
Great.
And I really appreciate you being here.
Corey, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.